Welcome back to the Contech On-Site podcast. This podcast is dedicated to the innovators and the pioneers shaping the future of the construction industry.
The biggest companies of tomorrow are going to be the ones that are investing in technology today, right? And understanding how to leverage that technology today. There's a huge problem that we have within the construction industry, and there's a labor shortage. It is a tool at the end of the day, but it's not a tool that you're going to Home Depot to buy as of yet, right? Mm-hmm. You definitely need to prepare for how you're using it on the job site. To get the company robotic-ready, you need to understand what it takes to deploy a robot onto a job site. I don't think robots are going to be replacing people. I think robots are going to be encouraging more people to join the construction industry. I think the next 5 to 10 years of construction will be more than the last 100 to 200 years of construction.
Wow.
And the subsequent years after that, the next 10 to 20 years, the industry will be unrecognizable.
Today, I'm excited to host Jorge Tubella. George is a founding member of the Construction Robotics Coalition, and until formally led robotics and research at Haskell, a multi-billion-dollar US-based design-build company. George led the deployment of robotic solutions and built research and development systems that directly address job site challenges. With George's understanding of both field operations and emerging technology, he brings a grounded perspective to where construction robotics is headed next. George, welcome to the Contech On-Site podcast. Tell me about Haskell and about your role as the Robotics and Research Lead, as well as the Construction Robotics Coalition.
Yeah, so Haskell is a top 100 E&R company focused primarily in consumer product goods and industrial construction. There is a group within Haskell, which is the one I work for, called DisrupTech. What we're focused on is innovation and corporate venture capital. We look at emerging technology and how to bring it into Haskell as a way of improving Haskell. And then we also try to encourage the growth of those construction technology companies. Our corporate venture capital side is strategic investments within these companies to help them grow a little bit more and help guide their journey along the way. So we have a little bit of skin in the game when we're helping them develop their technologies. The Construction Robotics Coalition was a group that was created with GCs, VCs, startup founders, consultants, academics, and the purpose of the group is to bring all these folks together to help try to solve for problems that we're having within the industry, right? And taking the burden off of founders to figure out a problem, right? And actually being able to select the problem that exists currently, right? So GCs could be like, hey, we're having issues with X, right? A founder can come in and say, let me solve for X, right? We are trying to engage with academics, so new roboticists and AI engineers and all the emerging technology folks that are coming out of the school are inclined to solve for construction rather than for other industries, right? And we're starting to see that trend build up, right? So we're starting to see folks starting their career and starting startups within the construction robotics space, which is extremely exciting. We've been a group for about maybe 2.5 years right now. It just started off as an organic conversation between some of my peers and colleagues in the industry, and it started growing into inviting a couple more folks right now. We did a couple panels. We went out to events like IEEE's robotic event out in Atlanta this year. We hosted a happy hour there, again, trying to spark the conversation of construction robotics and how to drive more folks into it. So far, it's been pretty fruitful. We've been able to engage with a lot of stealth startups and understand their technologies a little bit more and help kind of guide their journey and give them problems to solve for. I think the overall mission is being satisfied, and we're talking about more ways of growing it now.
Okay, so that's super interesting, right? And kind of, we'd say both on Haskell, in terms of a lot of construction companies might ask, you know, is Haskell a robotics company or is it a construction company? Why invest in robotics? Why is that even important?
Yeah, Haskell is through and through a construction company, but they have spent a lot of time and resources in the innovation space, right? We were founded off of an innovation, so we are one of the founder of Haskell was one of the founders of the DBIA, bringing that kind of workflow, bringing unique workflows back in the early or mid 60s, early 70s on steel manufacturing and how to leverage that. So it's always been a core part of what Haskell does. Haskell and the leadership in Haskell understands that the biggest companies of tomorrow are going to be the ones that are investing in technology today, right? And understanding how to leverage that technology today. There's a huge problem that we have within the construction industry, and there's a labor shortage, right? That's absolutely critical to understand as a driving force behind construction technology. The average age of the labor force in construction is about 42 years old, and we're seeing an increase in demand for construction, right? So more population, more construction needs. That there's a lot of software technology that's being developed to help bridge that gap on the AE side and kind of the project management side. And now we're starting to see a lot of that physical technology being created, right, in the form of robotics. So I think Haskell has positioned themselves in a way of being able to leverage that. And although we don't self-perform a lot of the work that these robotic companies are offering solutions for, we are certainly positioning in a way to take advantage of them downstream. So my role right now is focused on how to get Haskell robotic ready, right? And understand where to take advantage when those opportunities come up.
Okay, so that's a really important, there's so many questions that I have. That's a really important point to make. Not a lot of companies in the industry realize that dealing with technology or innovation requires a level of readiness. So when you're saying robotic ready, what do you mean by that?
To get the company robotic ready, you need to understand what it takes to deploy a robot onto a job site. There's not infrastructure built right now to be able to support that, right? How we're managing our connectivity on a job site is going to be key to uploading and downloading missions. How we are charging and managing the fleet of robots on our job sites is something that's going to be key. How our personnel is going to be interacting with those robots on our job site is going to be key. How are we going to keep the job site safe while we have robots navigating around it, especially during these early adoption days? When I first started working here, we took a quadruped out to a job site, and we were walking around, and people were staring at it, right? Because it was a foreign technology, and absolutely they should be staring at it, right? It's something new onto the job site. But that made me think, this could be a distraction during the early days, right? So you need to understand how to bring safety into this and making sure that you're integrating robots correctly.
Okay, so basically you're describing, right, a reality where the entire construction industry hasn't yet dealt with robots, right? And to do that, you actually need to make the construction site accessible to the robot. You need to have processes that are maybe built around, right? A robot that need to be adjusted. You need to figure out how robots and safety are going to go together, how people and robots are going to work. I think it's one of the most overlooked issues when it comes to technology and the construction industry. There's almost a false sense of confidence that, well, when it happens and when it exists, we'll just click a button and it'll work out. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I don't think that's how it's going to work. You know, you're looking at a tool, right, a robotic solution to solve for a person, right? It is a tool at the end of the day, but it's not a tool that you're going to Home Depot to buy as of yet, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a Hilti, impact hammer or whatever you're trying to get onto the job site that you could just buy and bring out and use. You definitely need to prepare for how you're using it on the job site and how people are going to be trained to use it on a job site. So absolutely, it's something that's going to be critical in getting it. And that's kind of where we're at right now in the journey. There's other stuff that I'll talk about in a second on how Haskell Haskell's aiming themselves to take advantage of these things and kind of getting the company robotic ready. But leveraging technology and solutions that are currently existing in the market, regardless if Haskell's performing those or not, and working strategically with our trade partners to kind of deploy these technologies, allow us to get that initial information download of what we have to do to get our job sites ready.
Okay, so you started by speaking about how Haskell it built its legacy on innovation, right? It worked with DBIA, right? And found out ways to get steel, right? Like manufactured, prefabricated, right? Mm-hmm. So how's that mindset? A lot of companies in this space or in the industry started being innovative, but slowly phased out of that. What do you think's the cause of that, and what makes the leadership here kind of really aware of it and say, you know what, it's worth it for us to invest in robotics, it's worth it for us to invest in technology? What do you think differentiates between Haskell and the rest of the industry at this point?
I think it's the culture within Haskell, right? I think it's everybody understanding and being very proud that that was a core part of it. And certainly some of that allure of being founded in innovation gets lost with the day-to-day, right? And that's part of our group's job of making sure that that's front and center. We have different innovation programs that we launched throughout the company that have been wildly successful as far as sparking that interest and not only developing that interest, but also having an outlet for that interest in these ideas to get to us, right? So we've invested a lot of time and money into that. And that's because of the leadership within Haskell, right? They're able to see down the line and understand the needs, right? They're looking at problems that exist today that we can define as soft problems that turn into extremely hard problems to solve for in 5, 10, 15 years from now, and getting in front of that, right? And they understand that getting in front of that, especially with the construction technology industry emerging, that they need to invest time and resources into that, right? So it was a good timing with the rise of these solutions, solving for these problems, and having the correct leadership in place that holds these values core, and being able to put their money where their mouth is and investing it correctly.
Okay, so we really kind of discussed that culture of innovation, and we started talking about the need to be robotics ready, right? So maybe could you elaborate a little bit more on what your efforts are in becoming robotics ready in the industry?
In the industry, I think the efforts are mostly in the Construction Robotics Coalition and kind of what we're doing there, and anything that I can speak about at conferences and things of that nature, and kind of pass any failures that we've encountered and pass it on to other companies, so we can kind of stand on each other's shoulders and continue learning that way. And it's a very symbiotic relationship in that manner. And then focused into Haskell, what my role is to start looking at all the solutions that are out there and seeing what is the lowest barrier for entry to getting a robot in there, right? Deploying that robot, talking to our trade partners or our VDC team or anybody else that might be able to benefit from that solution, and figuring out how to deploy it onto a job site. There's a lot of work that's going ahead at the time, right? Figuring out what we need to do with our models to get it ready, how we develop workflows to support that down the line, making sure that we are capturing those lessons learned and converting those into SOPs, and seeing how we can leverage those SOPs with other robotic solutions, right? So we've been successful in deploying probably half a dozen to maybe close to a dozen now, actually, robotic solutions onto our job sites, and seeing what are the commonalities between deploying them, right? And what are the unique things that have to happen for that particular solution to be deployed, right? I'm excited to see that there's a lot of, on the front end work, a lot of crossover with the preparation, right? Because that allows us to build scalable workflows, right? And where we're kind of at right now in our journey is understanding what we need to do on the job site to get it fully operational. An example of this could be as simple as preparing the slab if we're having a layout robot come through, right? So we need to clean the slab, make sure it's good, have the files ready, right? Being able to deploy our robotic stations where they need to be able to communicate with the layout robot effectively, understand what exactly we're printing, right? And what value we're getting from printing. Working with our design teams to make sure the design is as complete as possible, and coordinating that design with the actual schedule to make sure that we're not needing to reprint layouts on the job site, right? So there's workflows like that we're investigating right now in these early stages of integrating robots into our workflows. And then we're looking heavily into safety, robots that can increase safety on the job site. So we haven't deployed too many of those yet, but we're starting to gear up our efforts to do that. Example of robots that we're looking that can help with that are robots that decrease injury rates from doing like overhead work or repetitive work that might fatigue a worker or damage their limbs over time. So
you kind of discussed how the Robotics Coalition, right, is playing a role in getting people around the table, right? And I think that's a message that gets lost a lot, especially in the industry, where I think typically it's been the culture of the industry is keeping cards close to the chest and maybe not sharing as much. What's compelling for like Haskell to work with other companies that might even be competitors, right, and start discussing something that sounds very strategic, very confidential even?
Yeah. A huge driving force of that is cost, right? So money, right? Right now, when you're in the beginning of this adoption curve, it's expensive to, invest money into learning these technologies and how to leverage them. But by me sharing my experiences and my colleagues sharing their experiences with me, it allows us to really cycle quickly through and cut down to exactly what we need to solve for or how we should be leveraging these robots, right? We're still going to have our turn in it and kind of test our thesis on how it should be done, right? And that's good for the startups themselves because they're able to take multiple viewpoints and kind of combine that into a workflow that could be adopted across the industry. So not what's good for Haskell or what's good for one of our competitors or what's good for one of my colleagues might not necessarily be best for that startup and vice versa, right? So they're kind of balancing that as founders should. But we certainly have found by sharing notes across the spectrum that we're getting a lot farther.
Okay, so really it's either going pretty much almost nowhere alone, right, or going farther
Absolutely.
with people. And I think that is a message that the industry needs to hear, that innovation is something you do together, right? And there's a lot of models like co-opetition where the concept of cooperating, on maybe joint interests, right? And recognizing that it could be other sides of the business that could be competitive,
yes,
right? So that's a really interesting point.
In the innovation space, it's not a zero-sum game, right? Everybody has enough to benefit from within the innovation space. So you're getting a lot more by sharing your experiences and learning from others than you are from keeping your cards close to your chest.
Okay. So now I want to dive into the next question, which really is, what are the biggest challenges, right, that we're seeing today in the industry or that Haskell's facing, and how is robotics playing a role in solving that?
Yeah, the biggest thing by far and why robots are being investigated so much is the lack of labor, right? So there's a huge deficit in the labor force, right? And there's a huge demand, right? So robots are hopefully going to solve that problem, right? And that's why we're invested heavily into it, right? And I think that there's a huge flux of investment into the construction robotics community, right, to help solve for this problem. So Haskell's positioned themselves to take advantage of that.
Okay. And so we're talking about skilled labor shortage, but maybe if we could dive even a bit deeper, how are robotics going to be able to solve that problem? Could robots actually replace people?
I don't think robots are going to replace people. In a few years' time, I think we're going to be seeing robots used as regularly as any other tool, right? Potentially 5 to 7 years down the line. I think those are going to be in point solutions, right? So very specific solutions. And I think the novelty of having robots on a job site will wear off during that time period, which will help solve for, if a company has become robot ready, will help solve for a lot of those problems, right? I think as we continue progressing down the line, we're going to start seeing robots develop into workflows, right? And we're going to start seeing these workflows widely adopted across the organization. On the second half of that question, I actually think the opposite's going to happen. I don't think robots are going to be replacing people. I think robots are going to be encouraging more people to join the construction industry. I think as robotic solutions start rolling out into the industries and new jobs emerge to support those robots, I think we're going to start seeing more interest from folks that wouldn't have considered construction as a career before coming into this, because now their title would be robotics operator, right? So that's going to be a huge win, I think, for the industry. I think as well that the robots are going to be focusing on taking people out of the 3Ds, right? The dirty, dull, and dangerous. I think that's where we're going to be able to see the robots leverage the most. Let humans at least do what they're good at right now and being highly dexterous, right? And working in environments where they need to solve for custom problems, and allow robots to do the everyday work that is repetitive, dangerous, and just things that humans have been involved with traditionally, that we can remove them from those things and get robots solving for them.
So I always say this, but I don't see, today when I ask people, how many of your friends, are entering the automotive industry? Or how many young people are interested in that, right? But then if you ask the same question, how many people want to work for Tesla, right? There's a big gap, right? And that's kind of what part of the appeal of robotics can do for the industry, right? It's going to attract a lot more talent, and also a whole new set of vocations, right? That today just isn't non-existent in the industry. So maybe let's move on to another question. We were talking before about the different functionalities robots will have with right now data collection and even maybe the layouts. What are today's functions you could use robotics for?
With today's
with today's capability, where will that look like in 5 years from now?
I think you're getting into tasks that you can see robots that have traditional anatomies like 6-axis manipulators do over and over again. So you're talking about drywall installation, drilling, potentially installation, overhead and side installation, things of that nature. I think you're starting to see solutions that could be applicable today. You're seeing layout robots. We're starting to see robots for on-site logistics to transport materials across the job site, saving a lot of time there. In 5 to 10 years, I think we're going to see robots that are dedicated to workflows, which is, I think, one of the most important things for founders to kind of keep in mind when creating their robotic solutions, right? Because being able to create a solution that solves for one particular problem is good for that particular issue. Be able to have a good adoption curve, right, in solving for that is much harder when you're solving for one particular problem, right? If you have a workflow, right, integrated from end to end, your adoption rate increases substantially because you're now able to take that entire workflow, cut out your current workflow, and put it in there, right? That'll be with some effort, obviously, but it's not. But you're solving for an entire end-to-end production.
So I think what's interesting about that is, are we going to see a shift also in terms of contractors that start, because when we're talking from endpoint to workflow, right? You're basically creating enabling, right, people to maybe oversee a larger scope of the construction process, right? Today it's very fragmented, very specialized. Mm-hmm. Right now, if you have a robot that could pretty walk you through a whole workflow, how's that going to shape other players in the industry?
I think that'll create a brand new type of subcontractor and a brand new type of contractor. I think if you're able to control the end-to-end, as a general contractor, I think it's extremely attractive, the idea of being able to take more profit off of a job while reducing your risk simultaneously, mm-hmm. right? So having that internal accountability and internal quality and assurance that a robot can offer towards a particular trade, mm-hmm. right? And being able to deploy that repeatedly is a very attractive value proposition for larger companies.
So I think one of the interesting things is the market is shifting, right? And we could see that robotics is going to play some sort of role in that, probably a big one, right? Yeah. And now the question is, where are most contractors today going to position themselves according to that? And it's kind of what I see as kind of a reactive versus proactive game, right? Where Haskell recognizes that it needs to be proactive, and that's where the big gains are going to probably be. What do you think is going to happen to all the people who are being reactive and not doing anything at this point? They're just waiting it out.
Yeah, I think the folks that are going to be reactive are going to be scrambling because the folks that actually do the work are going to start flocking towards the company that have been proactive, mm-hmm. right? So if I'm a trade partner or an employee at a subcontractor and I'm faced with, I can be a roboticist at this company working, whatever amount of hours, but keeping myself safe and I'm just clicking buttons and observing versus working for a trade partner, getting paid the same amount or less, right, and being exposed to repetitive, hard work throughout the day, I'm going to pick the company that has the robots, right? So I think you're seeing productivity gains with the companies that have leveraged their robots and that were proactive, and you're also seeing a pull from the labor force going into that versus the companies that are reactionary. I think it's going to be a scramble, and I think the fallout of that will be companies potentially going under because they have not positioned themselves correctly. I think there'll be a consolidation of efforts through labor and robotic solutions provided from the companies that have been historically more proactive in their approach of leveraging robots.
Okay, so now let's talk about the people, right? Because there's a lot of people that might be, I was going to ask the question, with the quadruped, how are people interacting with it? What happens when they see it on site?
They'll stop what they're doing and they'll stare at it. And it's crazy because, since we've been working with it for a couple of years already, it's become like second nature to look at it, right? The novelty has worn off quickly. After about 2 weeks, I was like, okay, there's a robot, right?
I was going to wonder, anyone kicking it? Anyone?
Oh yeah,
like, what?
Yeah. I have to walk around and monitor it. Some people have gotten a couple kicks in while I'm not looking, right? And they just want to test it. I'm like, please don't. And some people have actually looked at it pissed off. They're like, what's that doing here?
Right.
Kind of situation. But for the most part, it's been well received. Some guys take photos. They'll come over and they'll be like, can I take a video to show my kids or something like that? Which is actually extremely encouraging. I'm like, yes, please show your kids, right?
Yeah.
That this is what's going on.
And that's also part of the robotics readiness, right? Letting people see robotics and solutions on site. Because if it just happens overnight, there's going to be a lot of pushback.
Absolutely. I think people's preconceived notion of what robots are on the job site is what we talked about a little bit earlier, that these robots are going to be taking their jobs, right? And I think once they get a little bit more educated as to what these robotic solution providers are creating and kind of solving for, I think they'll understand that this is helping them, right? Mm-hmm. This is allowing them maybe to get an additional 10, 15 years of work underneath their belt and getting paid for that, while not having 10 to 15 years worth of wear and tear on their body because of it, right?
Which leads me to really kind of, that question of how are people, right, the workers here, going to benefit from the robotics, right? There's a lot of fear in the industry that, a robot's going to come take someone's job. What's happening to those people who are being reactive or kind of, they're kind of trying to push away that concept of working with robots versus the ones that might embrace them today? Like, what would you tell them?
I think throughout their lifetime, they'll still have a role in the industry. I don't see, again, I never see a future that robots are holistically building a job site. I think there will always be some level of human interaction there. So I think with the current workforce, they'll have a place there. I just don't think that they'll be necessarily the highest paid, right? Because their skills have remained at the same level. If you have somebody that is interested in embracing these robots, they're skilled up now. Mm-hmm. Now they have to understand how a robot works. Now they have to understand how to operate a robot, how to maintain a robot on a job site, how to work with different stakeholders within the company to get data to be able to leverage a robot correctly. So they're getting skilled up completely. Like any other industry, is not uncommon to the fear of the robots taking our job. Back in the day, there was somebody's job to be able to light all the candles down the street, so people could see with lamps, right? Nobody's questioned where those people go now, right? Those families that did that for years have found throughout the years how to fill their work. So I think there'll be an organic shift. And I think the folks that are using this technology, the actual laborers on the field, will, if they're forward thinking, will be able to take advantage of it. Otherwise, the industry will decide for them, mm-hmm. right? And GCs that are positioning themselves correctly to be able to take advantage of this will kind of start implementing and mandating the use of it, because otherwise it would seem archaic, right? It would be like steel working without safety harnesses, right? At one point that was normal practice, right? But once safety harnesses came out, you cannot imagine a world where you're doing that type of work without safety harness, right? So I think the GCs will say, we can't imagine a world where we're not using robots, where we're putting our guys in a dangerous position, where we are losing out on profit because of lack of efficiency within the labor force.
Okay. So really the robotics, people who are going to adopt it, or the ones that are going to get more familiar or upskill themselves to work with robots, that's actually a career opportunity.
Correct.
Right? And at the end of the day, technology plays a lot of times a role, I believe, of another tool, right? That's the whole goal. It's to empower that worker to be able to do something less risky, less safe, right? In a more safe manner, and also be able to do a lot more than less, right? There's obviously going to be a difference in salary of someone who gets, I don't know what, he's going to 5x his productivity versus another worker that, that's 1x productivity. There's more money also to gain, right? So I think it's a really interesting conversation to play out versus that fear. And maybe the question for you is, are you more skeptical or more optimistic about the future of the industry?
I'm more optimistic than ever. When I first started investigating this as a career, which is back when I was in college, it was very doom and gloom, right? I felt like there wasn't a lot of people focusing on it, and I wasn't seeing a lot of technology develop around it, and I feel like I was sounding the bell at the top of a tower, and I felt, and I still do feel it's my responsibility to, in whatever capacity that I can, to help this trend move forward. In construction technology in general, right? Across the board from software to hardware. So as time has progressed, I've become more and more hopeful that we are going in the right direction. Seeing all these startup founders, speaking to them, seeing the passion that they bring to it, seeing that they understand the problems that the industry is facing in general and trying to solve for it, standing up over and over again when failure occurs and pushing forward and bringing other folks into it. I think it's a very optimistic time. I think the next 5 to 10 years of construction will be more than the last 100 to 200 years of construction.
Wow.
And the subsequent years after that, the next 10 to 20 years, the industry will be unrecognizable.
Okay, so I just want to know from the time you entered the industry, what has progressed in terms of robotics? Like what has been the main trend that you've seen, evolve when it comes to robotics?
When I first started looking into robotic solutions, there was pretty much one. It was SAM, right? The semi-automated masonry unit, which is pretty cool, right? And still out there. And it was basically, I guess, the most fundamental way of you thinking how you could leverage a robot on a job site, right? And aside from that, there was really nothing else on the market. As time progressed, I started seeing more.
What year is this around?
This was like 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
Right. As time progressed, right, I started seeing more and more solutions. Actually, in the past 2 to 3 years, I've seen an explosion of solutions. Right. For a long time, there was the same players in the house, right, and conversations of founders wanting to start up companies and seeing companies in stealth either created or died on the vine before they came out of stealth, right? So there was a lot of that, but now we're seeing tons of tractions, right? And in the role that I'm in right now, it's been great because they're kind of starting to funnel to me through different networks, including the Construction Robotics Coalition, right? So it's encouraging to see how much progression that we've seen in such a short amount of time. And I see it gaining speed and not losing speed.
Okay. Is there a definitive trend in terms of, focus on certain types of work at the beginning in early 2016, like you said, the masonry, right? But and now today there's more of a focus on other parts of the trade. We also spoke about before, kind of more endpoint solutions versus workflow. Are you seeing any of those trends happening as of now?
I'm still seeing a lot of point solutions, and I think that's lining up exactly with where we need to be right now is the construction robotics maturity level. I think we are still in that point where we need to figure out how to get the robots on the job site, how to navigate robots on the job site. You're seeing a lot of solutions either on platforms, and kind of taking advantage of things that have already existed in industrial environments, right? So robotic arms, robotic platforms, moving those robotic arms, and then trying to integrate that onto the job site. I think a key piece of that is going to be figuring out how to navigate a dynamic environment in a very fluent way without needing a lot of setup ahead of time, right? Because that's traditionally how a construction job site has worked, and that's tapping back into the founders looking at ways of adopting that. I think that barrier gets lifted up significantly when we start getting a lot of these foundational models rolled out. So the startup founders can start focusing on how to solve for those problems instead of how to solve the same problem that a lot of founders are looking for, right? perhaps autonomous navigation, some type of autonomous way of completing the particular work that they're trying to do, right? So they're all recreating the wheel in their own way because there is no wheel right now, right?
Yeah.
So I think once that barrier has been lifted, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the things that I'm hoping to see for, right? So entire workflows develop, ways of navigating the job site completely and effortlessly, being able to focus hardcore on the adoption for that particular workflow or trade. And I think that is going to skyrocket the leveraging. I think that'll be the breaking point of early adopters like Haskell and the rest of the industry.
Okay, so we're about to wrap up. What is the construction site going to look like in 10 to 20 years from now?
It's a big one.
Yeah.
I think 10 to 20 years from now, you will see an area allocated for robotic solutions. I think you'll see, similar to how we have trailers right now for our project managers and superintendents to go into, you'll see a separate area allocated completely towards robotic solutions. You'll see it like a garage. There's going to be robots coming in and out of there. I think you'll be able to call United Rentals or Sunbelt and say, hey, I need this robot for drilling utilities, whatever it is, and they'll ship it out to you and they'll park it right where it needs to go inside your robotics facility. I think you're going to see a whole new range of jobs. I think you're going to see a lot of people within that facility kind of maintaining robots and kind of taking ownership of what these robots are doing on their job site. Similar to now of how you have people out in the field looking at excavators and taking ownership over an excavator and being an expert in that particular portion of work. I think you're going to see a lot of work in the office, preparing the robots to be leveraged outside of the office and in the actual job site. I think you might see project managers focus entirely on robots themselves and superintendents that are focused on how to leverage these robots correctly on their job site and taking that as a tool. I think the same way that you load up your truck with a generator, you're going to load up your truck with a robot. I think it's going to be ubiquitous across most of the job sites, especially the large construction job sites. And I think that culturally, we're going to be able to see that across the spectrum, right? So it's not that you're just going to see it in the construction job site. You'll go to Starbucks in the morning and your coffee might be made by a robot, right? So you already have that culture kind of imbued into your body. So it doesn't seem far-fetched anymore to see a robot on a job site. It just seems like an impact hammer or whatever other tool that you pick up at Home Depot. And I think that in 10 to 20 years will be what we're seeing on a job site. We're going to see a lot less people on a job site, a lot more robots, and them working hand in hand symbiotically.
Okay. So first of all, wow, right? What an interesting future. I'd love to live in your head for a moment and see all that play out. It's also very visual. Maybe as a last question, how's AI really changing the game here? And I mean, what's going to happen with AI and robotics? Like, what's the synergy there?
Yeah, I think AI is playing a huge role. I don't think this could be done without AI in any capacity. If you look at traditional robots and how they've been leveraged, they are in an extremely structured environment doing the same repetitive task over and over again. They have some sensors that can help guide them through the way, but they're doing the same task over and over again. They have system integrators that'll go out and set up end effectors and everything to kind of supplement this. With the rise of AI, at least on the LLM side, right, it's been a great introduction on how to start leveraging AI. And I think culturally, across the world, right, it's been good for us to understand how we start interacting with this as a tool, right? That was the first wave of AI, and I think one of the most pragmatic ways that we've seen it. Going to be, when we look at back in history, this will be one of the turning points in history where humanity has evolved substantially. The way that robots or that hardware will touch the world is through AI, right? And we're going to start seeing that on the hardware side through these foundational models. So without the combination of these LLMs and foundational models, I don't think there would be a construction robotic industry, right? There's other AIs that take into account too, like object detection and things of that nature. But these are the two foundational ones. And then when you start combining both of these, I think that's when you're getting like an exponential return of the sum of the parts being greater than the parts in it. Because if you can talk to a robot the same way that you talk to a person, and the robot understands and has the dexterity to get onto the job site and do whatever you asked it to do and return back as you would expect it to do, you've just killed any adoption curve that you've needed, right? And I think that is where you're getting the most return on the effort. And I think that convergence point is a lot closer than we were, 10 years ago. I think we're 10 to 15 years out from seeing something like that.
Okay, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time, talking and sharing. I think it's all fascinating, and you're doing such an important role and shaping the industry. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate you stopping by and having a chat. Coming to Jacksonville.
Hey, if you're a regular listener or just as passionate about construction technology as I am, take a moment and hit that subscribe button. It's the best way to support us. It lets a platform know that our content matters. And growing the show keeps us motivated to bring our very best to every single episode.